Welcome back. My name's Gary, and this is the fifth video in a series I'm doing, trying to guide some people through some of the pitfalls in astrophotography. And we're talking about DSLR shooters with a non-guided tracking mount here. You can do nice things actually, and this video will be devoted primarily to taking a pre-processed, unstretched stacked image and finishing it off. So there's a lot of information out there about this stage. I just thought I would share a few different ways that I can do this and perhaps add to the total knowledge. The last couple of videos were the most important, though, for getting to a good starting point for this. In the prior video, there were a couple of things I should have mentioned that I missed, and it was already uploaded, so I just decided to put it at the beginning of this video instead. Where we left off yesterday, we had stacked and pre-processed an image in Siril, and that image remains. I haven't gone any further with it. This is it. And I said that we were done pre-processing, but there's one more thing a person should do in a linear state here. We're going to go to RGB. Within the options here is a median filter, and a median filter, I believe, is more effective in the linear state than later. And it's a smoothing filter, but it does detect and protect edges, so it's not a horribly bad thing to use. So what I'm going to do with most images is go to about 5 iterations at about modulation of around a half, somewhere in there, 3 by 3, and hit apply. So if we have a quick look at what it did here, so we've removed some noise, and it's actually improved the nebulosity a little bit. I'm not too worried about the damage it does to stars, because in this case they're all really badly aberrated by shooting f4 on an f4 lens. So normally I'd take an image like this and Arcsinate Stretch it, color preserving stretch, and we'll demonstrate that. But we're not going to actually do it for the final image because the chromatic aberration becomes too well preserved. Now, the other thing I wanted to touch on before we get going here is I mentioned yesterday that we have a script here called per sub background extraction no stack. This is for people with bad gradients in some or most of their subs. And the people who watched the prior video kind of know what this is about. After you have run the system on your light frames, and you have pre-processed light frames, a sequence like that, you can actually run this one, and it will generate 2 more sequences of light frames. It'll apply a gentle background extraction to each frame before stacking, which could be a valuable thing if you have problems like that in your images. So to run it, you want to be in Siril's home folder. That's how it works. But to look at the sequences, we're just going to change for a moment into the process folder. Okay, so now we're in the process folder, and we're going to search sequences, and I've done this. So our normal sequence was pre-processed light and registered pre-processed light. Running that script gives us background extracted pre-processed light and a registered version. So if you wanted to go ahead and stack this, you would just load up this sequence and go over to your stacking tab. And we went all through this yesterday, but basically you would just stack this one and start pre-processing the stack after you're done with that, as we discussed yesterday. But I just wanted to make clear how to use that and what it is. Then, of course, if you are in the process folder in Siril, the way to get out is cd space ... And now we're back in the home folder, which is a good place to be. So in this video, we're going to look at Arcsinate stretching, but I'm not going to do it in Siril. We're going to do a partial stretch here and then finish it off in GIMP. I'll be demonstrating the proper Arcsinate stretch technique, as well as one or two other valid brightening techniques. Two other ones I think we'll do. So what we'll do is take the image up somewhat, and from there we'll do some color contrasting, high pass sharpening, and then blend in the star layer. Now what do I mean by that? We're also going to be using a program called Starnett++, and I'm going to show you a couple of images of mine. This is the Veil Nebula, and typically people have to shoot it with filters in order to not get drowned out by the stars. So Starnett++ is a star removal program, so I view it as a filter for DSLR shooters. So what you can do is get rid of the stars. It's not quite this easy, but here's the finished result. You can get rid of the stars and replace the ones you want, and but it separates your subject from that nasty background. And the people that like to, do star reduction, be my guest. I don't think it'll work too well. Something else that's kind of interesting about this is a different image. This is the Rosette Nebula. This is one of the stacks I did. I think I did this one for the nebulous layer, and this is the finished result. But one thing that's interesting about this, if you criticize the procedure, this is real color. I've gone looking. Everybody shoots this with a filter, and they're all red. I've only found one image in this color, and it belongs to NASA. So that's not bad company to be in. So anyways, we're going to run through that procedure as well. So back to Siril. And we're going to start looking at stretching. Now I've applied, whoops. I have not applied that filter because we closed it and reopened it again. So we're going to go back to median filter. Now for this image, I'm going to go a little stronger, 5x5, because I actually want the stars to wash out and lose some of that chromatic aberration. I wouldn't normally do that, but let's just have a quick look and see what it does. First of all, we're going to make sure it doesn't damage the nebulosity. So we'll hit apply. And undo, redo. Okay, if anything, that's given us a little bit better definition in the nebulosity. Now I'm going to undo and redo. Okay, these stars are still going to be a problem. This is an auto stretch, in other words, a histogram stretch view. The image is still linear, but so what I would like to do is demonstrate Arcsinate stretching. I'm not going to do it though because it's color preserving, which is good in one sense, but when your stars are like this, it's no good at all. So we're going to go to the Arcsinate Stretching Transform tool, and you can go like this and get close, but you don't want to stretch in big jumps like that. I would say 48, 50, something like that. Maybe take down the blacks just a smidge. You don't want to clip blacks, but you want to be close to them. In fact, I don't trust that about clipping blacks, so I'm just going to hit apply. You know, every time we double it now, we're kind of doubling that first 50 we did, so it becomes much more sensitive. Okay, I think that is enough. Now we're in an Arcsinate viewing mode right now. This is not linear. If we go back to linear, we're not done yet. Okay, we can take this up a little bit here and clip some blacks. We don't want to actually clip black though, we just want to stay close to black. And apply. Now I'm going to just show you a star. I can't work with that. Starnett will take out the white, the blue will remain. We're still going to have a problem with that in histogram stretching, but that will be easier to deal with than this, which is the reason we won't be histogram or arcsinate stretching this image. Now what I'm going to do is understretch it and demonstrate arcsinate stretching in GIMP. Would work the same in Photoshop. There's a particular technique that needs to be used to be faithful to it. So we'll be using that technique. We'll also be using a luminance-based technique, and we'll be using, well, I'll get into that later. We'll do 3 different ways of bringing the level of the image up at the end. So anyways, you can see though that this would generate, if it weren't for these stars, a pretty nice reproduction of real color. So I am just going to go back. Oh, redo the median filter. In fact, what I'm going to do is hit save. That median filter is now baked into the fit file. So anything else I do when I start back at this fit file will be starting with that applied. Okay, so instead of Arcsinate stretching, we are going to go to Histogram Transformation. There's a shortcut button down here for this as well. Now, Siril does have a nuclear button for this. I find it too harsh. I'd rather do it manually in steps, but okay, that was the auto stretch view. Let's go back to linear and reset. That's what it actually did. So boom. If you're happy with that, you're good to go. I want to do less stretching today, and I wouldn't do this much anyways because there's better ways to bring the subject up at the end. So we're going to go reset and do this in a very manual way. And this whole procedure is going to be quick. We're not going to get a perfect image. I don't even know what it'll look like yet, but I'm going to just show you a few different workflows that could be helpful. So we'll give it another one of those, and apply. Okay, we're starting to see the subject matter now. Okay, I want to be a little bit understretched when we leave, Siril. And this is actually looking pretty good for a star layer too. What I would usually do is understretch a little bit, export a TIFF from which to make stars, and then stretch more fully for the nebulous part beyond. So I'm just going to hit apply there. I think we're good. I'm not going to save this fit file though. If I come back to it, I'll be starting from before the stretch. But we are going to save off a TIFF file here. So we're going to call this just master.tif, and we are going to put it in this NA stretch folder. This is going to be my working folder for this project, and then when I'm done I can just drag it away and I'm ready to start another project. So we are good. Save. Starnett++ is a 16-bit program, so I have to go to 16 bits here. If I was just working in GIMP, I'd leave it in 32, but also if you're in Photoshop, you need to start in 16 bits, so this is a good place to do it. No compression. I usually just get rid of all the comments and hit save. That is done. We're not going to save the fit, so we are going to... So what we can do is go look at the image that we just generated. And there we are. So the first thing to do is lift it further. We didn't finish the stretching here, so I'm going to actually demonstrate a few different ways to do that. So we're going to open up in GIMP here. And there is our image. First thing we want to do is look at levels. For an Arcsinate stretch, we actually want to trim down close to black. I'm going to use the upper histogram because the lower one is less accurate. So, okay, we're not clipping anything there. That's pretty good. We do not want to touch this slider because that would be histogram stretching. So I'm just going to go OK, and that's our base layer now. So let's duplicate that. And we will call this histo. We're going to do that as a histogram stretch. I'm going to duplicate it again. We're going to call this one Arcsinate. And I'm going to duplicate it one more time to show a different technique altogether. And then when we're done, we'll pick the best of these three to export and continue on with the project. So let's do, first of all, a histogram stretch. So this is very simple. It's just exactly what everybody's used to doing. And in this case, I like to use the upper histogram. I want to brighten it. Okay, I would kind of call this stretched. That's pretty good, actually. We can do other things to lift it the rest of the way. Normally, I would filter and color balance at this point, or sorry, smooth and color balance, but there's no need to smooth because we did that heavy median filter earlier, and there's not much noise there. So this is okay. So I'm going to call the histogram stretch done. So let's drag him down to the bottom here. Turn off. Let's go to a blending mode. So these two images are identical. In the blending modes, we've got a bunch of different groups here. This is the lighten mode, the darken mode, the contrast group. So we're just going to hit screen. What this does is it divides the image by 1 minus the same image. So it's brightening. If you did pure division, it's not going to work too well at this point. We'll be using divide later, but if you do pure division, it's not a good thing. But you can do screen, and you get basically an image multiplied by the inverse of itself, which gives you a brighter image. Now that is not too bad. I'm going to do one more thing to it. This is something I don't know if you can do in Photoshop. This is more a GIMP thing, I think. But we're going to just take levels and apply a contrast mode. And in both these cases, you can use opacity to decide what you want. So let's use this one. Okay. And then let's just try a brighter. Nope, that's no good. We'll stay with screen. So we could call this one lifted, and it's in a screen mode, so I need to go new from visible. If you're in Photoshop, it would be Control or Command, Alt, Shift, and E is in Echo to create a new layer from visible. So we're going to actually get rid of our mode layer, and we'll rename this one to mode. Okay, so histogram stretch mode. This brought out more color, more contrast. So the last one we're going to look at is an Arcsinate Stretch. Now this one, I need a layer group so that we can do the comparison. So we're just going to call this one Arcsine. That's the group name, and we're going to take this image into it. Now a lot of people, you can download the presets for curves for Arcsinate stretching, and if you just do that and apply it, it's less than ideal. It's not the right way to do it. It's not color preserving at that point. It's just kind of a variety of a stretch. So if you have these, you might want to watch this. What we are going to do is duplicate this layer. You know what? The first thing I want to do is just go and check that we're clipped to black again. Okay, we are. So we are going to go on. So we're going to do a duplicate layer and name this one Gray M, enter. And we are going to desaturate it. Now in Photoshop, you'd probably have to just zero your saturation slider or use your black and white adjustment layer. But in GIMP, the way we're going to do this is desaturate, and I'm going to choose the luminance layer. There's a few choices here. Might use a different choice in another stage of this process later. We're just going to take the luminance layer, and now we're going to duplicate that, and we're going to call this one Gray Divide. So now we're going to change the modes into multiply, and we are going to take this one and change it into divide. So at this point, there's no change. If we take away the divide one, the multiply darkens it, and if we take away the multiply, the divide does that. For the proper histogram stretch, Arcsinate Stretch, you're stretching the multiply layer, the gray multiplier layer. So we're going to go Colors, Curves, and I've downloaded and installed the presets for Arcsinate Stretching. If you don't have these and want them, just search Cloudy Nights Arcsinate Stretch. It'll come up somewhere very near the top of the list. The guy that wrote this did a lengthy article about that there. So we're just going to click Arcsinate 10. So this is kind of like applying 10 to the base layer, but it's color preserving. Now again, if this is too much, I mean, we could have brought this up from unstretched entirely, but if this is too much, you can just turn down the opacity. And to me, this looks pretty good from where we want to go here. Okay. So at this point, we've got a bunch of blending going on here. I'm just going to do a new from visible. And we will call this Arc. And I will drag it out of the group. And we can collapse this and turn it off. So now we can start comparing Arcsine versus that mode. Okay. The mode one is kind of something we could work with, but it wasn't color preserving. So let's look at now Arcsine versus the histogram stretch. Now you see how the histogram stretch lost a bunch of color? So I'm going to proceed with this Arcsinate Stretch. One of the things I kind of stayed on all my images is no color changes. So I could use this mode 1 and do some kind of cool stuff with it, but it would amount to a color change. So at least I can use Arcsine and say with some fidelity that we haven't changed colors. And so that's what I'm going to do. So we are going to export this as a TIFF, and we're just going to put it into the same folder for now. So we're going to call this, and I'll tell you why later, stars.tif. Now in GIMP, maybe in Photoshop, if you export a TIFF with layers, you want to uncheck that and thumbnail. It'll work. It'll do everything you expect it to do. You can reopen it. But if you go to delete it, it won't. It's kind of a Windows bug. The thumbnailing system gets hung up on multi-layer TIFFs. It does from the TIFFs from GIMP. I don't know about Photoshop, and I'm talking about Windows 10. So you never want to export a multi-layer TIFF. So we're going to turn off Save Layers and hit Export. So this is done, and I don't think I'm even going to save this because we're going on to another step now, and there's just not any point in coming back here. So now we have our master.tiff and our lifted one. So the next stage here is to go over to Starnett++, and I talked about that a little bit earlier in this video. Now another bug with GIMP is if I take this one to Starnett, it is a 16-bit TIFF. It should meet all the parameters, but Starnett won't run it. I don't know what the problem is. So at this point, I'm going to go back to Siril. I guess you could use any other program that you have, but we've been using Siril a lot here. We'll go to this, and we're just going to open up stars.tiff. It's all good, and we are going to re-export it. And we will just use the same file name, replace it, 16, no compression, save. So that file is now usable. So we're going to take it to Starnett++. Now in my machine, when you download Starnett++, it just comes as a zip and you extract it to any folder on your computer. And so you want to put it somewhere kind of convenient. It's a command line program, so we're just going to take stars.tiff over here. Now, if you took any other file name, you could just grab the file and drop it on run rgb starnet.bat, and it would start processing it. Now, the problem with that is that let's have a sorry, you could run it on the exe directly, and it would run it. The problem with Starnett is that this is the command line that you use, and they have something here called stride. Now this can be any number from 2 to 128. If you run directly through the executable, it's going to default to 64. So the lower you go, the longer it takes. Running at 64 stride takes 4 times longer than running at 128. Running at 32 would take 16 times longer, and if you ran it at 2, you might as well just take a 3-week holiday, and it might be done when you get back. So the default is 64. I've had luck with 100. I'm actually going to do 64 this time because of that chromatic aberration. It might make a difference on quality, but it's going to take a lot longer to run. So I'm just going to close that and save it. So at this point, it's looking for a file name called stars.tiff, and it will output a file name called starless.tiff. So all I have to do is double-click on this batch file, and it's going to launch. Now I've done the GPU acceleration on this, so it makes the speed. If you look at my machine now, I'm running 30. The CPU is just idling. The GPU is working now, and it's going to process about 5 times faster than if it was running on the CPU by itself. This is a fairly extensive modification to make, and you need an NVIDIA GPU. There's a guy on YouTube, The Lazy Greek, and he did a whole video on this process. That's where I picked up on it. So if you're interested in doing that, you should watch that. Just search in YouTube for The Lazy Greek and the word Starnett, and you'll find it very quickly. I use this a lot, so it's kind of worth doing, but it may or may not be for you. Now, when you do that upgrade, it starts throwing out memory errors. It's nothing fatal about that. It's a kind of a work in progress. It doesn't hurt anything, but at this point, we are 36, 38. It's going. If I'd used that 100 stride, we'd be done by now. But like I say, I'm looking for a little bit better result this time, so we're gonna wait this one out. So I will just pause this for a couple of minutes, and we'll be back. Okay, Starnett is done now. So now we have a stars.tiff, which is the one I fed it, and we have a starless.tiff, which it generated. So let's flip over to the other one, and this is what it did. It uses an AI program that is content-aware, so it removes the stars and then fills in the gaps with what it thinks should be there. Now in this case, I had this blue fringing around all my stars, so that remains, and that's going to be a problem, especially when we start lifting this image and color contrasting. They will get worse. So anyways, what I'm going to do is just rename these files now. We don't really need those, so we'll go back to the project. And I'm going to just rename this. Doesn't really matter. main starry, and the starless one will go main starless. Okay, now we can take these two back to our working directory. And there we have it. This master, we'll keep it, I guess. That's our initial stretch out of Siril, but it's not part of the project anymore. So this main starless, you know what? Before we start pulling those blue spots out of there, I'm going to make my star layer right now. So we're going to open this with GIMP. And then we're going to open as a layer the starless version. Okay, so we have those two. Now what we're going to do is take the starless version and subtract it from the starry version. And that leaves the stars. So, new from visible. I'm just actually going to flatten this. Again, we don't need to come back and revisit this for any reason. Export as. And I'm just going to call this starlayer.tif. No saving layers, no saving thumbnails. And that is done. No need to save it. So now we have our star layer, which will come into the project a little bit later. I'll show you how to blend it in. So we're going to now open this one with GIMP, the starless version. This is the background behind, well, behind the stars, whatever you want to call it, that will become the main project file. Now, like I say, I am going to spend a little bit of time with the healing brush, getting rid of the worst of these blue rings, because they will just get worse when we work with this project. So in GIMP, it's control to set a point, and then you paint with this. I'm using the healing brush versus the clone stamp because the clone stamp actually copies the pixels. Healing brush is more subtle. It just takes kind of tonality. So you want to be picking a source spot that's pretty close in tonality to the destination spot, but won't actually replace the pixels or the textures of them. So I'm going to stop the video temporarily and spend about 10 minutes doing this, and then we'll come back when I'm done. Thank you. Okay, pretty much done that. It didn't take too long, but this is what happened. That was before, this is after, and I just kind of went through the whole image doing that, getting rid of those blue spots because they will get worse. So the next thing we need to do, I'm going to duplicate this layer, and we're just going to call this the base. And we are going to delete this one. I never want to see those blue spots again, and this is going to just be something like original. We'll just leave it there and turn it off. Okay, now this base layer needs to be lifted a little bit, but it's not too bad. We can almost go straight into color contrasting. So I think the first thing we need to do is color balance it. If you look at the histogram, it's not quite color balanced right now. I'm going to show you two different ways to do that. I'm sure you're familiar. In levels, and again we're watching the color histogram up here, we could just take, for instance, the blue channel. That's the highest one, so we'll match the other ones to it. We're going to take up the midpoint slider, and I'm going to just use the arrow key to march it over. Okay, green looks aligned with blue now. So we'll go to red, which is fallen behind, also the midpoint slider. And that looks not too bad, and we could call it color balance. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you a different way that I kind of prefer. I think it's actually a better way. In GIMP, it's components, channel mixer. Photoshop, I know there's a channel mixer. It's probably under the tools or adjustments. What we are doing here is blue is the highest. So we're trying to match green to blue right now. So we're going to be in the green channel. Since we're matching to blue, let's just take the blue and the green channel up a little bit. And if you saw that, the histogram actually got higher. This is a way to accomplish kind of the same thing and get more signal out of it. So I'm just going to blue and green channel and click it just a tiny little bit at a time here. That looks pretty much aligned. Now the red has fallen behind. So we are going to, I'm just going to see, no, that doesn't really help the view at all. Now we're in the red channel, and we're matching red to green and blue. So I'm going to give it a bit of green and a bit of blue. Okay, we're not there yet. Okay, red looks pretty centered. Yep, I haven't even looked at the image. I'm watching the histogram. I'm going to click OK on that, and I should have made a new layer for that and called it color balance. Anyways, this isn't a keeper project for me, so I'm not doing everything correctly. The other thing I'm going to do now is bring in that star layer, just so we kind of see how these various stages look with the stars in there. So I'm going to go open as layers, and we're going to take our star layer. Now for now, I'm not finalizing this yet, but for now we're just going to put this into a light and only mode. So only the parts of that layer that are brighter than the other one show up. And you know, that's a pretty good starting point. You can just adjust opacity, or you can do contrasting, or you can do levels on it, whatever, and we will end up doing that later. But I just wanted to have a little preview how this looks. Not bad. Okay, so we're going to do a couple of contrast methods. So we're going to duplicate this layer. We'll call it levels, and we'll duplicate it one more time, and we'll call this one modes. So let's start with this one. What we have is this layer visible above the other one. They're both identical. So the first thing we're going to do is change its blending mode. Now, earlier we did a lift with screen. That's a little bit strong, so I'm going to do this time addition, and that doubles the image. So we are going to add a contrast layer, or a contrast element, into this. So we're going to, now this opacity is kind of controlling the degree of contrast. I think the contrast is good. We'll go okay with that. And then here we're adjusting the opacity of the whole thing. How much does it add to the other image, so to speak? So I think that is good. At this point, I'm going to do a new from visible, delete the mode one, and we'll change this one to modes and turn it off. So this is the change that we just made, a significant lift. Now, the other way that we can do this is a bit multi-staged. We're going to change this to, well, first thing to do is to desaturate it. So we're going to just grab the mono mixer and turn this into a luminosity layer. So that adds a little bit. I think we could just play with the luminosity a little bit there, take it up a little bit, maybe bring down the darks. Okay, let's go with something like this. This is only stage one. We are going to new from visible, get rid of that level, and then this visible we will call levels. This is thanks to a YouTube poster called AstroEd. He had a couple of great ways to do things. This is one of them. So now what we're going to do is take down the center slider, maybe just down to kind of the end of the clipping point here. Just going to kind of halfway keep the main histogram in view as well. And click OK. Now we're going to go to levels again, and this time we're going to bring it back up, one channel at a time and from the white end. We're going to take it, it's a fairly significant jump, but let's just use this point as a beginning point. Now we'll bring up the greens, and this time I'm watching the histogram up above, not so much the slider that I'm using right now. So we're trying to match the blues. Green and blue look pretty well aligned now. So let's go to the reds. And we'll do the same thing. We don't want to make actual color changes. So we are trying to just match the peak. And that, to me, looks pretty good on the histogram. I haven't looked at the image yet. So let's see what change that made. Okay, so this has got some more color contrast in it. Now let's look at the modes version. Okay, less overall contrast, but it kind of brought out changes in the colors as well. So this last couple of minutes has been an edit after the fact. I'm replacing, so we're going to if I was going on, I think I'd probably use this one, but in the video that continues after this, we chose modes. It looks a little bit different than this, but we'll go back to our regular programming. I'm just going to get rid of this one to align with what is coming up in the next couple of moments. So let's see how that one looks with our stars. So this one we are going to duplicate, and we will call this high pass. Sorry, I do not, oh, because I'm not visible. Yep, high pass. So now we need to duplicate again. And we are going to filter this new layer with something called a high pass filter. Now this is, they call it sharpening, but what the high pass filter does is it detects edges. It adds contrast to edges, but it doesn't really add a lot of noise. So I believe in Photoshop you've got a pixel scale here, how many pixels it looks across here. In GIMP we have a standard deviation. So what we do is just bring that up a little bit until we can see what it's going to affect. And then we also have, again, kind of like a volume control here called contrast. So what we're looking for is to pick up edges, but not to go too far beyond them. In this case, we're looking for contrasting or edge definition up in this area down here, maybe along the pelican a little bit. So let's, I can preview this in GIMP by just changing into a contrast mode. So let's see what that does for us. That's on, that's off. Okay, that kind of does something good. I'm going to bring up the standard deviation a little bit more. Okay, I kind of like that. Let's see what happens down at a detail level. Okay, it makes the darker reds darker and the lighter ones lighter. And again, we've brought out these spots again, but they're not as bad as they were before I went through and healing brushed them all away. So that's not a horrible effect. And again, this isn't a keeper project for me. I'm just kind of demonstrating some different techniques for you. Okay, so I kind of like that. Let's go with that one. Now, this layer is now on. I'm just going to merge that down. We don't really need to come back to it at this point. And now we've got a star layer. Now, let's talk about our star layer. And there could be other adjustments. We might put a light gray in the background if you're not the sort that likes a deep black background. But overall, we've got a Pelican Nebula. We've got a North American. This is nicely contrasted because this tends to reveal real structures by separating the colors from one another, and I think that's a good thing. So let's talk about stars. Now I've done this in the star layer in a lighten only mode, and there are sometimes cases where some of the stars are not brighter than the nebula or galaxy, and they don't show up, and that can create kind of a cool effect. I'm just going to put this into a brighter brighten mode. Okay, there's a lot more stars here, but kind of too many. So what I'm thinking is go lighten only, but I need something to put some stars in the brightest parts of this. I kind of like the rest of it. We're good with that. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. Okay. And sorry. We are going to take our uppermost other layer, and we are going to copy that, duplicate it, and we are going to desaturate it. And I think one of the best things to do here is, I'm looking for something kind of contrasty. That's maybe a bit too much. I think I'm just going to go with luminance for this. We're going to go Control A, Control C. Now I can delete that layer. We got what we want out of it. Now we're going to go back up here and add a mask. It doesn't matter what it's full of, so we're just going to add it. And then we are going to go Control B. And I've highlighted that mask, so now we have a floating selection, and all I have to do is anchor it. And now this grayscale has become a mask for the second star layer. Now what I'm going to do is just go into curves here, and we're going to contrast this a little bit, because we want that mask to let those stars through, but only in places where it's brighter in this image. We don't want the second layer of stars to show through everywhere, because it will be kind of nasty. So now we're masked, and now I can make, actually I'm going to turn that mask off, I think. Okay, now that mask is off. Now I'm going to change this to screen. See how bright that is? It's not so good. Now I'm going to turn that mask on. So now this screen layer is only putting brightness into the brightest parts of this image. And we could go back and edit that mask with the levels, for instance. Let's bring up the whites if we wanted more of those stars to come through. So now we have more of those stars coming through, but not in the darker parts. So to me, this is, you can do kind of a starless version or a little bit more starry. So this is what this new layer is doing without anything. Now these stars, we could also mess with them a little bit. Let's just take curves, take it down a little bit. You don't really want to drop the whites because they become dull and washed out, but you can play to get the effect you want. If you drag it down like this, if you play down here, you're affecting kind of the masses of stars that are in there. I'm finding something like this is kind of good. I like that. So I'm going to call this project finished. And if you're like me, you always want to put a name onto it. So if you have a little name badge or something, you would do this before exporting. And I think that we are done with this. So this is the conclusion of the North American Nebula project. I'm going to just go back to a different view here. It's obviously turned out differently than this one, which I'd done another time completely. I mean, you can't really duplicate exactly what you've done, and there's options. But anyways, I hope I demonstrated some interesting ways to do things. I'm going to do one more where we take a stacked pre-processed galaxy, probably Andromeda, because so many people work on that one, and apply similar steps to processing that one, just again to hopefully bring people to a better place in where they are. So in this series, we've talked about kind of introductory stuff in the first video, and we touched on, I'm not trying to add to knowledge that is really commonly available out there, but a lot of people don't really understand ISO, so we did something in the first video about identifying the best ISO for your own camera for DSLR shooting, at least to provide a starting point. In the second one, we talked about calibration frames because they can help deal with problems that we would have had to deal with here, and it becomes very difficult, some of those, so we did that. The third one introduced Siril and using it for stacking and just getting to know the interface. The third one we actually did stack, and I pointed out some features and did some pre-processing, getting an image ready to stretch. And then finally in this one, we've done that stretching from the stack and turned it into something. So I hope you found this helpful. The only one remaining is the Galaxy one in this series, but I will continue to publish if I find things greatly lacking in the public domain in terms of information that I think might be helpful to some people. So thank you for spending this time, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.